y'all, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. This is going to be a really fun show. Later on, we're going to have Seth Emerson on the program, and I know that, the Alabama game is still a little bit of a touchy subject for some Dog fans, but I thought Seth's second glance, look back at the game, pretty insightful in terms of kind of what went wrong, where Georgia goes from here. We'll do that with Seth Emerson coming up. But what I think that some Georgia fans are going to get a bit of a kick out of today is Gus Malzahn has said something very Gus Malzahn-like. The more we learn about this guy, the more we realize that no one's a bigger fan of Malzahn than Gus Malzahn is. You're going to like this quote here today early on in the show. I think it sets us up for a pretty good conversation about how things may unfold in the SEC in 2018. It is all on the way. DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
One of the great catchphrases that was kind of born out of the 2017 season was the idea of rat poison. Nick Saban said it at one point, and then it seems like 5 minutes later, the whole world was using that all the time, and everybody sort of understood exactly what it meant. Saban has a way of kind of doing that with some of his, weekly press conference remarks, and it's sort of a stickiness that all of a sudden the entire world's kind of paying attention to what he said. Go back to October here when, the idea of media compliments, the media saying good things about you, Saban wanting to avoid that, and he had a very Saban-like way of describing just how detrimental that could have been to his team. Let me play this for you as a reminder of that.
I'm trying to get our players to listen to me instead of listening to you guys. All that stuff you write about how good we are and all that stuff they hear on ESPN, it's like poison. You know what I mean? It's like taking poison, like rat poison. All right, so I'm asking them, are you going to listen to me or are you going to listen to these guys about how good you are?
So I don't know if the idea of the rat poison is really real, that it's bad for a team to hear too much good stuff said about it. I don't know how real that is. I'm assuming, though, that it's partially true. It is partially real, that staying focused and staying hungry, maybe even staying to a degree humble, my guess is that is a little harder to do when folks are patting you in the back and talking about how good you are. Maybe conversely, for the team that's not hearing a lot of that kind of stuff, maybe that does give just a little bit of an extra edge, just a little bit of an extra competitive advantage as it works its way through an offseason. If that is true, then that's good news for Georgia because there is a lot of rat poison being tossed out in the direction of some of Georgia's SEC rivals here. Let me start with Danny Cannell. And some of y'all know Danny as a bit of an SEC hater. I mean, listen, there is a degree to which all of this is just pro wrestling. We're all sort of playing a character. We're all just sort of playing a role here. And Cannell has decided when it comes to SEC fans, he wants to play the heel. He wants to be the villain. He wants to, always kind of stir the pot in sort of an anti-SEC way. And frankly, I guess it's probably working. Now, Cannell doesn't have a job that I know of, but he is at least, establishing a brand of, hey, the one thing you know about Danny Cannell is this is a guy that's going to say bad things about the SEC, except for when he doesn't. He's on what I assume is his radio program on Sirius XM. It's the ESPNU Sirius XM channel. He's on there talking about Alabama. And listen to this noted SEC hater, Danny Cannell, the biggest critic of the SEC probably in all of the mainstream media, but listen to how profusely he praises the Crimson Tide here. Dare I say that he tosses a big old dose of rat poison in the direction of Tua Tagovailoa in Alabama? Take a listen to this.
Ultimately, the one thing I thought about, there were two things. One, Saban is the best coach of our time, the best coach. And two, he's going to win the next two in a row because this is the first time he'll have a quarterback who is much, much more than either a game manager, as he had in Greg McElroy and A.J. McCarron, or a dual threat guy that really is limited passing like he had with Blake Sims or Jalen Hurts. And if what we get in that half, which I'm assuming it is because we all heard about Tua and how great he was and the expectation and the hype, if he gets that type of play out of him, they're going to be unstoppable. They really are, because defensively, no matter what happens, no matter how many guys leave, they're going to load up. They're going to have some weapons offensively, so they'll be able to surround it. It's always, for me, has been with Bama, they're just offensively, they don't do a whole lot. It's not exciting. If they can start doing stuff like that, they're going to score 60 points a game next year.
Well, there you go, y'all. I don't know what you're planning on doing for the next 24 months, but now we can take up a new hobby. We can learn cross-stitching or learn chess or whatever it is you want to do. You've got 2 years that have just been sort of opened up because we now know, according to Danny Cannell, how the next 2 seasons, and not just the SEC, but all of college football are going to play out. Alabama's going to win the next 2 straight national championships. They're going to score 60 points a game, and I guess based on 2 quarters and an overtime, Tua Tagovailoa is now the greatest quarterback of all time in college football. I mean, I'm glad to have my free time back. I don't have to worry about the next 2 college football seasons because Danny Cannell has apparently seen the future and is going to tell me exactly how all this stuff is going to work out. Obviously, I say that with a degree of sarcasm here because while I'm going to be just as impressed as anybody with what Tua did in the second half and the overtime for Alabama, and Alabama's going to be a grizzly bear to deal with no matter what every single year. I mean, there is almost an unavoidable, need to notice that what Cannell is tossing out is the exact same kind of rat poison Nick Saban talked about earlier in the year because college football is not that easy to predict. And, to act like that Alabama has somehow distanced itself in a great way from Georgia because it won by 3 points in overtime, and all of a sudden now a team like Georgia is looking up helplessly at this runaway train that is Alabama for the next couple of years. I mean, I don't think that reflects the reality that any of us have experienced here in the 2017 season, and I think that Danny Cannell comes off a little silly by making it sound like that there's some sort of foregone conclusion to what Alabama is going to be able to do over the next couple of years. But wait, that's not all, because Cannell's not the only one tossing around something that I think that Georgia fans are going to find interesting. You've also got Auburn coach Gus Malzahn, who is in Houston, and I guess the truth is all these awards run together. I'm sure as a college football, talker for a living, I should be able to keep some of this stuff straight, but apparently he's in Houston because he's a finalist for one of those Coach of the Year awards. I can't keep all this straight. There's 9 million of these awards, but he's there, and while in Houston for this ceremony or this, whatever, he goes on a Houston sports radio station. The question comes up of Alabama and Georgia in the national championship game, and Gus Malzahn is good enough to let us all know that he thought there was only one team in the country good enough to beat Alabama, and it was his own. Here is Gus Malzahn saying a very Gus Malzahn-like thing.
We got a lot of guys coming back, and we felt all along this year that we were the only team that could beat Alabama. Of course, it ended up being that way, and we got a lot of guys coming back. I know they're very hungry, and anytime you've been close and you have everybody coming back or a lot of guys coming back, it really helps you. And I know we're going to be a hungry team. Now, you got to earn it in our league. The SEC West is a monster. Every week you got to bring your lunch, and but I really like where we're at.
So, listen, the SEC is apparently all taken care of for 2018. You've got one team that's going to score 60 points a game and can't be stopped. And if they can be stopped, apparently the only team that can beat them is Gus Malzahn's Auburn team based on Malzahn's own assessment of the situation. Never mind the fact that Georgia beat Auburn 28-7 in the SEC championship game. Malzahn sees his team uniquely capable of beating Alabama, despite the fact that, Georgia came within an eyelash of doing that itself. Now, a lot of this is mostly in fun. I think that, Malzahn has a right to feel good about his team, and Danny Cannell's got a right to say about Alabama whatever he wants to say. But I do think that Georgia fans might take a bit of comfort in, Malzahn poking at his chest a little bit and folks acting like, that Alabama's some invincible force. Because I think that Kirby Smart, underneath all of that hype, I think that Kirby Smart delivered his own message on Monday after the game. It was a disappointing night for Georgia. There's no doubt about that. When you get close to winning a national championship, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and finish it off because you're never guaranteed of being back in that spot again. But most of us, I think, believed Kirby Smart when he said this.
I can't say enough about the remarkable senior class. These 2 young men sitting next to me, they meant more to Georgia than yards. A lot of heart and soul, a lot of fire. Sonny Michel came over and talked to the group several times during the game, inspired those guys. But in overtime, we didn't finish when we had to, and Alabama did. And to give them credit, but I think everybody can see that Georgia's going to be a force to be reckoned with. I'm very proud of this team and this university, and we're not going anywhere.
So Kirby Smart says everyone can see that Georgia's going to be a force to be reckoned with. I'm not so sure right now what the definition of everyone is, but apparently doesn't include Danny Cannell, and it may not include Auburn coach Gus Malzahn, which is probably just the way that Kirby Smart wants it. You know, I love what Mike Johnson said yesterday about the motivation that his 2008 Alabama team got from losing to Florida in the SEC championship game. And you know, they saw replays of that game over and over again, on and on, week after week, month after month, through those hard, cold winter months when you're in the weight room, leading into spring practice, and then on the field. And for Georgia, these next few months are going to be incredibly significant. New leaders are going to have to emerge. New desire, new intensity is going to have to be reborn here to kind of get back to the spot, to beat Auburn again, who will be a formidable challenger. Gus Malzahn's not wrong when he sort of brags on his own team there. And Danny Cannell's not completely wrong when he says with Tua Tagovailoa at quarterback, all of a sudden Alabama's a far different animal to deal with than it's been in the past. Yeah, they probably are even tougher to beat now because they have a more capable passing quarterback in all likelihood when it comes to Tua Tagovailoa. But let's not act like 2 quarters of football dooms Georgia for the end of time. I think Georgia's going to be back in a big way in 2018 as well. And these 3 teams we just mentioned, Alabama, Georgia, and Auburn, will be battling it out. And then they will be fighting for that spot back in Atlanta, that spot in the college football playoff. But folks shouldn't be too quick to write off Georgia just because the second half of this game on Monday didn't go the way Dog fans wanted it to. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Good to be with you here today. Whether you're watching us on video at 10 a.m. on the DawgNation Facebook page, listening to us on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, or checking us out in podcast form, iTunes, SoundCloud. I'll post the show for you at the world-famous DawgNation.com. We try to make DawgNation Daily easy for you to find. We're glad you found us today as we roll towards National Signing Day, a big time coming up for Georgia recruiting. We'll actually talk some UGA recruiting a little later on in our program today. And if you want to hear more UGA recruiting talk, the place to be for that is this upcoming Tuesday night at the Marlowe's in Buford for our Marlowe's Countdown to Signing Day event. I want to tell you all about this. This is going to be a lot of fun. It's this upcoming Tuesday, January 16th from 6 to 8 p.m. Marlowe's in Buford. That's the Mall of Georgia location. It's 3333 Buford Drive. Once again, 3333 Buford Drive there in Buford, Georgia, right behind the Mall of Georgia. Jeff Sintel will be there. He and I will be having special Facebook Live broadcast, off-air, kind of off-the-record type conversation where Jeff lets some secrets sort of slip out. That's always a lot of fun. Special guest, my understanding, is slated to be there. I don't know who it is, but Jeff always delivers in a big way when it comes to those special guests. We've had Dominic Blaylock. We've had a lot of really Chris Smith was a great guest for us, the Marlowe's at Emory Point. We've had some terrific guests. Last year was Andrew Thomas. It was Trey Blunt. It was Devontae Wyatt. I mean, we had all these great recruits to come show up at our Marlowe's events. It's going to be a lot of fun on that as well. We had J.D. Bertrand the other day, by the way, as well, at the Marlowe's in Roswell. So you get the idea of the kind of guests we've had. Another big-time guest expected to be with us this upcoming Tuesday. Also, our friends from Tailgate Apparel, who I talk about in downtown Athens a lot. They're going to be on hand as well. My understanding is they've got a few giveaways for us, too. So a lot of fun coming up. Marlowe's on Tuesday at Buford for our Countdown to Signing Day event. Jeff Sintel, me, special guests, and you as we get ready for our National Signing Day coming up in February. All right, I've got Seth Emerson coming up here on the program in a moment. Before we do that, let me take care of a little bit of I'm going to call it a news roundup. I can't think of a better way to describe this. There's just a few little tidbits I kind of want to get to here, all worth probably at least mentioning for a moment. Rashad Roundtree, the sometimes Georgia defensive back, sometimes Georgia linebacker, who's dealt with a lot of injuries, I guess, here during the 2017 season. Roundtree's football career has come to an end. He tweeted out this message: as a result of a number of concussions, with a heavy heart, I announced that my journey in the path of football has come to an end. As a child, all my dreams involved playing football, and it deeply saddens me that I can't play anymore. Heart goes out to a Roundtree that his football career is not going to finish up the way that he wanted it to. Obviously, injuries are a tough thing to deal with, and for Roundtree, also, it seems like he was a great athlete that had a hard time kind of finding that position at Georgia. Sometimes, it just doesn't work out that way. You certainly wish him well in the future with his life after football, and appreciate the contribution that he's made to the Georgia program. I also thought this tweet from Bruce Feldman was pretty interesting about Aaron Feld. Feld, of course, is the Georgia assistant strength and conditioning coach, and he kind of became famous during the playoff because of the big mustache. Georgia fans were familiar with that. A lot of folks outside the program came to know about that. What Feldman writes, though, is that he's expected to become Oregon's new strength coach. So he'll take the full-time job apparently at Oregon, according to Bruce Feldman, after being the assistant at UGA. And I'm always very, very respectful of the job that strength and conditioning coaches do. I think that strength and conditioning is, in addition to getting stronger and getting faster, I think it's also a lot of ways the head coach of the offseason, the guys who have more contact with players during the winter months than the actual coaching staff does. So Feld leaving is a potential point of interest here because you want to make sure your strength and conditioning staff remains strong. And if this does indeed happen, as Feldman's reporting it might, then we certainly wish him well too. I also saw where Davin Bellamy has applied for a trademark for his famous "humble yourself" quote. We all remember from the Rose Bowl what he told Baker Mayfield at the end of the game. In fact, let's check that out right now.
Humble yourself. What happened in the second half?
So I love the "humble yourself" line that Bellamy used. I hope he can make some money off that as a trademark. The problem is sometimes these things have a way of, and you know how quickly the news cycle kind of runs through. Sometimes people have a tendency to forget about these phrases after a little while, but maybe Bellamy can make himself a little bit of money on that if he does indeed get that trademark. I'll also mention briefly here a little bit of bad news. Georgia loses in basketball last night on the road at Missouri. I'll be honest with you, the game came out at 9 p.m. I sort of fell asleep before this one got into its crucial moments, but it sounds like Georgia had some struggles here in the first half I was watching. It was not a beautiful display of offensive basketball, but Georgia's still a pretty strong record, comes back home to play on Saturday against South Carolina, and so we'll see how that plays out after Georgia does lose on the road at Missouri last night. So a lot going on with Georgia. We're obviously trying to cover it all here at DawgNation Daily. Good to have you with us on the program today, and as we promised, hope you enjoy Seth Emerson right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And Seth Emerson does join us here on DawgNation Daily, and we're kind of getting to that time of year where you start paying attention to some of the Georgia players with the decisions to make, who sticks around for another year at Georgia, who moves on to the NFL, or maybe in this case, who moves on to a transfer home. Seth, I'll welcome you to the program, but I'll also ask you, Seattle Times had kind of I thought sort of a weirdly worded report about Jacob Eason going to Washington. Can you give us any kind of insight into, I know Eason's not really said a whole lot publicly about this, but I mean, from your perspective, what is the timeline for Eason and how soon might we hear something from him about this?
Well, I thought we could hear something pretty quickly, and I wasn't shocked by that report, but it hasn't been confirmed, and as we talk here on Thursday morning, nothing's come out. I don't know if, and that goes for all the pro decisions coming up. I don't know if it's just because Georgia was so late in its season and involved in everything. On the other hand, Alabama had a slew of news yesterday with their guys, and obviously they had their season go as long as Georgia's. So it may just be that a bunch of guys are still deciding, still getting information. If you take guys like DeAndre Baker at their word and told me they were, still needed to talk to Kirby and get more information, I would tend to believe that these guys had a pretty good idea what they were doing before the championship game. That's usually how it works. That you spend that time over finals and before bowl practice, kind of gathering information. And then over the Christmas break, you go back to your family and you basically make a decision, and then you basically clam up when the media asks you about it. But some guys may not have made a full decision. I think we all know Jacob Eason will leave. I mean, that's just, I guess foregone conclusion seems to be the way I would put it. Obviously, he will leave. But where he goes and everything, I mean, it doesn't surprise anybody if he ends up back in his home state, obviously. And I would expect something to be official on that pretty soon.
When it comes to, another subject that's kind of been on the mind of a lot of Georgia fans lately, look, I'll tell you, I do this show from the perspective, obviously, of a fan. And as a fan, the one rule I try to occupy is that not to make too big of a deal of officiating one way or another, because that can be some sort of a maddening deal, because there's not really very much you can do about that. But in your second glance piece, and you're very much, much more certainly objective than I'm going to try to be, you even pointed out that there were some calls in this game that obviously went against Georgia. You've also got this sort of scuttlebutt on the internet about this officiating crew being reprimanded by the Big Ten after a game. I believe it was in 2002. I'm assuming that report's accurate. It's been cited by a lot of mainstream media type people. I mean, what is a Georgia fan to do with all of this information? Both calls that went against Georgia, the idea that this officiating crew had problems before. I mean, what do you make of all that?
Well, here's one thing I know. The stuff going around that the head referee, I think Dan Pepperon, or I don't know how to exactly, but he was not fired in 2002. There was, I think, like the Purdue student newspaper reported that, and then some other people run with it. I mean, Google is a wonderful thing. It can get you information that's correct, but sometimes it can lead you down the wrong road. There was a story in the Chicago Tribune 2 seasons ago, where the Big Ten head of officials said, basically specifically cited that that wasn't true. That what happened was there were some bad calls in a game in 2002. He was head of that crew. I don't know how many people that were on that crew 15 years ago were working that game on Monday night, but that official was benched for one game, and then he came back. He was never fired. He continued to work. And also the head of officials said in that story that specific head referee was not at fault for the calls that he was just basically sat down because it was his crew and because you're in charge. And I'm assuming that, if I were judged on every story I wrote in 2002, there'd probably be some clunkers in there I'd like to have back. I'm assuming that over the next 15 years, he and his crew did something to warrant getting that national game assignment. Now, having said all that, that crew had a bad game on Monday night. That's the long and short of it. I don't think there was any favoritism towards one team or another. They whistled Alabama and Georgia for the exact amount of calls. On the block punt, I think that unless I'm missing something on there's some neutral zone infraction deal that Simmons went through, and no one's told me I am. I think that was the wrong call. But that flag is going in the air as before Simmons is arriving and blocking the punt. So that's not a situation where they're like, oh, we got to keep this game close. Now let's throw a flag. So I think, I just think they had a bad night. I don't think there's any question about that. And it's tough for Georgia. It really is, because you look at some of those plays and they really could have turned the fortunes of the game. If that Simmons block stands, Georgia's got a 13-0 lead, in the red zone and a chance to punch it in. And even if you just settle for a field goal, 16-0 at that point would kind of seem insurmountable. But on the other hand, there wasn't anything on the final play. Georgia just really got outplayed in the fourth quarter. They couldn't do anything on offense in the fourth quarter. Alabama couldn't really be stopped until the red zone in the fourth quarter and in overtime. So it's something that you look back on and say, bad breaks, some poor calls that went the wrong way, but like you said, there's really nothing you can do about it anymore.
So I'll admit that I was on the field for those final 5 minutes, the way the media is allowed to be, and when I thought that Alabama was about to win the game in regulation, I found myself having to take my phone out and start scrolling back through the drive chart data to even figure out exactly how we sort of got to this point that Georgia was about to lose a game in which, for a lot of the game, it seemed like it was well on its way to winning. I'll admit that the end result ultimately sort of snuck up on me. Now, Alabama didn't win in regulation. They won in overtime, but the result was the same as it appeared to be with about 2 minutes left to go in the game. What was your feeling kind of watching the sort of late third, early fourth quarter unfold? Did you see this slipping out of Georgia's hand as it was happening, or was this sort of an after-the-fact revelation for you as well?
I don't think I realized this was going to happen, that it was really slipping away until Alabama got that ball to have a chance to tie it as it was 20-13. that drive, I don't remember. I think that may have been the one time Sony Michel touched the ball during that last stretch. Was that drive when Georgia got the ball after Alabama had to settle for the field goal, and they go 3 and out again, and Alabama's going to get the ball back, and you're like, ooh, this is real. Here it comes. And even then, on the 4th down, where again that could have been a false start called on the Alabama receiver, but it wasn't. The more I looked at it, it wasn't egregious. It wasn't like obvious the way that kind of the block punt was. But even then, if that pass is incomplete, then there's still enough time for Alabama to get a 3 and out, force a punt, and get the ball back. Pretty good field position. So it was kind of slipping away at that point. But then you get after the missed field goal, you just kind of think, well, how many times has this happened that a team misses a field goal and then the other team wins? It usually goes that way. It was just kind of an amazing way it turned. It was like the Oklahoma game. Wild swings and a comeback, and this time Georgia was just on the wrong end of it.
I like the line that you used in your second glance piece where you said that Sony Michel almost became a bystander in this game. Obviously, he had some big plays, and then it seems like for some Georgia fans there wasn't enough of him in those kind of crucial stages. And you did a good job kind of laying out what Georgia did do offensively in the fourth quarter, and it just looks like the offense just kind of stalled there, and ultimately that leads to the Alabama victory. In terms of the way that Michel is used, though, is it the kind of thing that Jim Chaney should have realized in the moment, hey, I've got a hot guy here, I've got a guy that's having success, and stick with him? Or is that the kind of thing that's sort of only more apparent after the fact, that the Chubb plays were ineffective, the Michel plays were more effective? Is that easier to see in, I guess, retrospect, or is that the kind of thing that Chaney should be able to notice in the moment?
I think that if we ever get a chance to talk to Jim Chaney about it, and it may not be until August, and you bring it up, I think this would be one of those instances, and because he's always been kind of a, buck stops with me, stand-up guy. I think it's going to be hard for him to say anything but, yeah, I'd like to have that back. Because the thing was, Sony wasn't even on the field a lot of these plays. DeAndre Swift was actually on the field for several of these plays, and not even Chubb. Maybe in the heat of the moment, you're in the fourth quarter, you're trying to run out some clock, and you think Chubb's your best guy, but then you get the ball back with a couple minutes left in regulation with the game tied, and then in overtime. I think those are both instances where you just do have to say, well, what plays have been working, and the one time they were a little more creative was on the Mecole Hardman run down the stretch there, and he got 8 yards, but he was stopped a couple yards short, and then the next play failed. There were, on a couple of those passes, I think Sony was on the field for one of those. The play was snuffed out pretty quickly. And for all these recriminations and everything, and I'm participating in it too, I mean, you do also have to give credit to Alabama.
Yeah.
I mean, if Georgia ended up, when you look at the context of the way it happened midway through the third quarter on, I understand where the slings and arrows are coming from, but Georgia did, against that Alabama defense, end up with, 365 total yards, which is pretty good. I think if you'd said before the game, you're going to get 365 yards, you'd say, we'll take our chances. But obviously the bottom line is winning the game, and winning the game was there for them, and that's something they weren't able to do.
You had a really interesting stat also in the second glance piece about Isaiah Wynn, and I lived through this. I guess the numbers still surprise me, though. 19-2 is his ultimate record as a starter for Georgia at left tackle. That's a tremendous career. I don't mind telling you, I do think as football prospect, Andrew Thomas may be a superior football prospect, but boy, he's got a lot to live up to moving to that left tackle spot. I mean, how do you gauge Thomas's readiness to kind of slide over and be in a role that Isaiah Wynn filled so capably this season?
I think they feel pretty good about that, considering the way he played at right tackle, and there's no. I mean, I asked Sam Pittman that last week at National Championship Media Day, and he was pretty upfront. Yeah, we're moving Andrew Thomas to left tackle. There was no, well, let's see about spring, let's competition, yada yada yada. No, they said no, we're moving him to left tackle, which I think that's a sign of confidence in his ability to do it. That they're saying that is going to be what they do rather than compete or any of those other things.
Right. Riley Ridley has a big game in the national championship. If Georgia wins, this is the kind of thing that you're writing stories about for a long time because of the irony of the fact that he's playing against his brother. There wasn't as much of Ridley during the season as we would have thought. Any chance that Ridley takes that momentum from a big finish into his junior season?
I mean, look, he slid into Javon Wims' role when Wims couldn't come back from that shoulder injury, and look what he did. So I mean, when I get around to doing my look-ahead depth chart to next year, I'd slide in just him into the Wims role, and you're kind of three starting receivers if you're looking at a three-receiver set, or Ridley and Nicole Hardman and Terry Godwin.
Yeah.
And then, probably a big drop-off to the next group because, of playing time. I mean, who else would you put there? I actually did talk to James Coley a little bit. Not about, I talked to him about Ridley, but I talked to him in general about the receiver group for next year, and there's some guys who have a chance to kind of move up, and spring and preseason will be important for them. But it certainly looks like those are your three, Hardman, Ridley, and Godwin, pretty solid to start the year.
I want to finish with a DeAndre Baker question. He's obviously facing a decision. You kind of touched on that a little early in the conversation. I didn't see the TV broadcast. I've got it recorded. I guess I'll watch it at some point in time. But, boy, apparently Kirk Herbstreit was really throwing some praise Baker's way. I think he's been a good defensive back for Georgia. There's no question about that. I guess I was a little surprised at just how effusive Herbstreit was in his praise of Baker. I mean, do you think that he's a potential really high NFL draft pick? Is that kind of either what you've seen or what you've heard?
Well, I mean, everyone knows Calvin Ridley is. So when he threw in DeAndre Baker in with him, that was notable to me. I don't know how much he's getting that talking to Mel Tucker or Kirby Smart or his own NFL analyst or whatever. But here's the way I would look at DeAndre Baker. Now I don't know if he's going to go pro. I really don't. But DeAndre Baker, if we kind of, people out there might poo-poo him as a first-round pick or even a second-round pick or a guy that might go pro because of our perception of him coming into the year, which was, okay, yeah, he's the number 2 cornerback, but or the number, maybe he's okay. He had a nice sophomore year. If we went into the year looking at him differently as a potential star lockdown cornerback, we would be sitting here going, yeah, he's probably going pro because he had that good a year. He was. I mean, I watched all these games. I'm sure there were some completions on him, but there just weren't big ones. And it seemed like any time the ball went near him, he had the play covered. And we all know what happened on the other side of the field on the final play of the game.
Yeah.
And that was on a senior and a senior safety. But DeAndre Baker had a really, really good year. And if he does come back, I think that's really good for Georgia because they had in him this year something approaching and maybe really a lockdown cornerback.
Hey, Seth, really good stuff. Thanks for your time here on DawgNation Daily. Appreciate all your coverage of the college football playoff. It was a lot of fun to read. We'll look forward to speaking to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Brandon.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, good stuff there from Seth Emerson. Really interesting. A lot of what we kind of focused in on was that that second glance piece that he had written because I thought it was pretty detailed and kind of a good final postmortem on the national championship game. I know somebody already just kind of turned the page on that. I do get that, but I thought a lot of what Seth wrote was pretty important, at least to kind of touch on. And interesting stuff there on DeAndre Baker. And I imagine the days ahead, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of that. Baker coming back to Georgia would obviously be good news for the Dogs. I don't know that I quite think he's as good as Kirk Herbstreit might think he is, but I do certainly think he's good, and I agree with Seth that it's certainly good to have him back in the fold for 2018 if Georgia can. I think it's interesting that Jonathan Ledbetter right now, at least based on what he said, is coming back before his senior season, barring, I guess, a last-minute change of mind for him. That's also big news for Georgia. And then you'll kind of play the wait-and-see game on Trent Thompson. I really don't think there's a wait-and-see for Roquan Smith. I mean, as much as, obviously, Georgia fans would love to see one more year of number 3 on the defense. I mean, this guy's a top 15 pick, and that's a lot of money, and that's not the kind of thing I think that you just don't move up the draft by coming back for another year. So Roquan's probably no decision to make at all. Some of these other guys, hey, we'll see how it goes as they kind of weigh what's best for their future there. That'll obviously be something worth paying attention to because there's no denying that the decision of Bellamy and Carter and even to a certain extent Aaron Davis and Dominic Sanders, obviously Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, them coming back to Georgia clearly helped Georgia for 2017. And if some of these guys for Georgia this year decide to come back, that's obviously going to be a kind of a big thing as well. As we start our SEC through here, by the way, I'll also remind you that DawgNation Daily brought to you in part by our friends at Kroger. Of course, Kroger, known for the Kroger Click List now. Listen, we're all busy, right? We're all trying to get places, do things, and we want everything to be done in the most efficient, time-managed way as possible. That's what Kroger Click List exists for, to get you in, get you out of your Kroger with exactly what you want and the time that you need for it to do. You can go online, Kroger.com, find out more about it, get signed up, get your ordered online, and then show up. You don't have to get out of your car. The Kroger folks come over and they deliver it to you right there. So Kroger's been a great sponsor and a great friend of us here at DawgNation Daily, and we would invite you to check out the Kroger Click List. I'll also really quickly also squeeze this in, too, that Seth was talking about that Purdue student newspaper story about the officials in the national championship game going back to 2002. Some of y'all had sent that to me. I read that yesterday. I actually tried to go back and read it again today online, and I don't know if it's been pulled down or what, but I tried to get into it from a couple different browsers. Couldn't get into it. But I think that, that Seth is probably right, that in some respect that story from 2002 has probably been misconstrued a little bit. Certainly reprimanded, maybe not fired, but clearly an officiating crew that had some problems in the national championship game. Just as a fan, I'm left to wonder, what do you do about it? And it's almost, for me, helpful not to dwell on it because of the fact that there's really no recourse for what you may have thought were some calls that go against you. And I understand that some of you have been a little critical of me because you think I haven't talked about it enough. But I did want to at least ask Seth Emerson about that today. By the way, speaking of SEC news, since we're 4 minutes in the SEC through, we should probably talk about the SEC stuff here a little bit. Damian Harris is returning to Alabama, leading rusher of the Crimson Tide, coming back. Listen, Alabama's always going to have a stable of running backs. Harris going to be a part of that group. I think that in 2018, you're probably going to see a lot more of Najee Harris, the other Harris there for Alabama. So Damian coming back is good news for the Tide, but I think that Najee Harris may be the best running back on that roster next season. Thought that Ian Rappaport, a NFL analyst, had an interesting line. We're going to play this audio for you on SEC Country Live later on today. Rappaport and talking about future NFL offensive coordinators. The name that he mentions is the current Crimson Tide offensive coordinator, Brian Dable. Dable had been the tight ends coach of the New England Patriots, came to Alabama this year. He's the reigning national champion. Bit of a hot name because everybody watched him on TV on Monday. Rappaport says that he could be in line for some NFL offensive coordinator jobs. Maybe that's the case. The Tide's last offensive coordinator before Dable, Steve Sarkisian, after one game, obviously bolted to the NFL, so that's what's out there for Dable. This sort of feels like grasping at straws to me. I don't know if there's any real team connected to this actual name, but Rappaport's putting it out there. He's throwing against the wall. Maybe we'll see if it sticks. By the way, speaking of sticking, there's a big old billboard sticking to a sign there in Tuscaloosa. Some UCF fans. As a fact, if you're watching the video, we have the picture for that right now. Travis Ryer from 24/7 Sports puts this up. It says, "Congratulations, Alabama. How about a home-and-home series with the UCF?" Listen, I don't fault the hustle, if you'll pardon that phrase. I don't fault UCF for doing this kind of stuff. I guess it's actually UCF fans who do this in this case. But I can't help but think back to what Florida State, in the Bobby Bowden era of the 80s, when this program is becoming good, its motto is anywhere, any place, anytime. And if you want to build a program, and Bowden essentially built Florida State from nothing, I think that's the attitude you have to acquire there, not the, hey, we'll play you as long as you do home and home. It's any place, anywhere, anytime. And UCF, to its credit, kind of did that. It beat Auburn in a bowl game. That's a real level of credibility. But this kind of stuff is earned slowly. I think I think some college football programs think they have a right to exist just because they want to. That's not how the market works, and this is still a business. By the way, something else we'll play for you today on SEC Country Live is Scott Frost taking a bit of a shot at Nick Saban, saying that, putting Tua Tagovailoa in, he should have, over the course of 12 games, recognized that Tua was the better quarterback over Jalen Hurts anyway. This Scott Frost, man, he enjoys himself some Scott Frost, and my prediction is he's going to go to Nebraska and never be heard from again. But right now, he feels like he is the toast of the town, so I hope he is enjoying his 15 minutes. One more quick story to get to for our SEC through. John Chavis, the former Tennessee, LSU, Texas A&M defensive coordinator, was announced and introduced as the new defensive coordinator at Arkansas. He gave his introductory press conference yesterday and spoke of the possibility of Arkansas winning a national championship. I do think Arkansas almost qualifies as one of these sort of sleeping giant type programs. I think they could be in that category, maybe a little smaller giant than some, but they're obviously a long way away from that kind of competition, and to Chavis' credit, he did acknowledge that himself. I think, though, when you look at 2018, Arkansas has had a really bad recruiting cycle, and it's going to take a while to sort of build that roster in the image of Chad Morris, the new coach, who's diametrically opposed to what the old coach Brett Bielema was. I think you're in a scenario in 2018 in the SEC where you may be hard-pressed to find a lot of contenders. I think Alabama, Georgia, Auburn are all three pretty good again. I think that LSU is nowhere near as good. I think that Tennessee and Florida still struggle. I think Arkansas is really bad. I think there are going to be a lot of bad teams for the handful of good teams to really beat up on in the SEC in 2018. At least that's my early read on the league anyway, and we'll make that your SEC through. And now here on DawgNation Daily, our build up towards National Signing Day is going to continue now through February as we kind of pay attention to those final recruiting spots that Georgia still has left. We're not quite sure how many additional players Georgia can add because we don't quite know what to make of some of Georgia's public commits who didn't sign during December. How many of those still intend to come to Georgia? Well, we don't quite know that yet. Georgia's obviously looking to add some elite players, but Georgia's not the only one chasing some of these guys down. I thought it was kind of interesting to see a little bit coming out of Florida here over the last couple of days about Dan Mullen, who, made some saber rattling in the direction of Justin Fields at one point in time. Now maybe trying to do some of the same stuff with some of the other players as well. Florida's procured a official visit with Quay Walker, the linebacker from Crisp County, who's currently an Alabama commit. There is some thought out there that Walker may flip from Alabama. I guess Auburn's still in the mix here somewhat too. At one point in time, Auburn was sort of thought to be his leader. Maybe now, if you believe what's out there a lot, maybe Georgia is the leader here, even though he's the current commitment to Alabama. But Florida, I guess, has secured, according to Zach Alberverdi from SECCountry.com, the final official visit for Quay Walker. I think this may be one of those things where, in Walker's case, that final official visit may not ever happen. I think that he's got other visits coming up. He's got a trip to Georgia coming up. I believe it's is it next weekend? I hope I'm getting that right. But one way or another, I think Georgia's going to try to sew things up with Quay Walker before the Florida visit ever officially takes place. I think that Georgia's in a battle for Walker. I wouldn't put Florida among the teams that Georgia's battling with the most. I also thought it was kind of interesting on Florida with another Georgia recruit, Tommy Bush, who Bush actually caught up with Zach Alberverdi to talk about his relationship with Florida. He says, I was talking to them before, and then when they went to Florida, meaning Dan Mullen and his staff, we just sort of picked up for there. He says Florida does have a shot, but there are other schools we've been talking to longer. It kind of sucks because it's so late in the game. So Florida trying to make a bit of a push here with Tommy Bush, the four-star wide receiver, but it sounds like, much like a lot of scenarios for Florida, Mullen kind of coming in a little too late for a lot of these prospects. I know that Bush is still considering Michigan State, still considering Baylor. If you look on the 24/7 Sports Crystal Balls, most of the predictions for Bush are for Baylor, but most of those go back to early December before the early signing period opened up there. So Florida trying to get in on Tommy Bush, trying to get in on Quay Walker, maybe a little too late for Dan Mullen, but the Gators still going to try to put a class together. All right, and I guess the other thing that Zach Alberverdi kind of reports that was kind of interesting is that maybe there's still an outside chance that Florida could put in a top 10 class here for the 2018 cycle, which would be different than what Jim McElwain did in his first year of 2015 when the Gators didn't even finish in the top 20. You know that when it comes to sort of my suspicions about Jim McElwain, almost all that was sort of born out of what I saw were McElwain recruiting failures. In terms of Dan Mullen being better at Florida than Jim McElwain was, a lot of that's going to depend on how much better he is as a recruiter, and we'll watch between now and February to see how that's the case. By the way, speaking of Florida, 289 days from right now, we think Georgia heads back to Jacksonville for another renewal of the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. We think Georgia wins again. We talk about it every day. It's our Gator Hater Countdown here on DawgNation Daily. Why do we do it? Because we believe a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater first and foremost. Good to have you with us in the program today. Back again at 10 a.m. tomorrow. We'll talk to you then. And for those of you who are on with us on video, we will talk to you right now about really anything that you want to talk about. Michael Green says, do we have any new offers for a new strength and conditioning coach? I think he's referencing Aaron Feld there, the famous sort of handlebar mustache, really kind of he almost looks like a cartoon character almost. He's kind of got sort of pointy hair, handlebar mustache. He's unmissable. He's an very recognizable person. And Bruce Feldman's reporting that he could be taking the Oregon strength and conditioning job, the head job. He'd be the Scott Sinclair for Oregon at that point in time. And I'm sure that Smart and Sinclair, I'm sure they've got plenty of candidates to replace Feld ready to go, but I do take strength and conditioning positions very seriously. I do believe this time of year, it's those strength and conditioning coaches that have the biggest impact on your program. Sinclair's with those Georgia players more than Kirby Smart is. It's one of the reasons why Scott Cochran, and we talked about Cochran from Alabama on the show the other day. Mike Johnson will tell you that Cochran was his biggest influence at Alabama, much more so than Nick Saban would have been, maybe even much more so than his offensive line coach would have been. I don't want to put words in his mouth on that, but Mike was a big, big believer in Scott Cochran. Cochran who smashed that national runner-up trophy, and those guys, in addition to sort of implementing a strength and conditioning program, also maintain the attitude and the atmosphere around the program. So you take it seriously when you have to replace guys in those positions, but I'm sure George will do a good job replacing him if that indeed is necessary. Dennis Wood talking about Derek Ansley. So is that official? I mean, there's been so much happening here. Is Derek Ansley officially leaving Alabama? Because some of y'all talk about that sometime, and maybe I just miss it. Yeah, so so it's not official, but there are plenty of reports out there that Derek Ansley is leaving to go be a defensive back coach in the NFL. And you're right, if that be the case, that's more more ability for maybe Georgia to swoop in with a Tyson Campbell. I think in the case of Tyson Campbell and Quay Walker and some of those guys that Georgia's trying to chase down who have those Alabama ties, Campbell who's slated to take an official visit to Alabama, next Saturday, I believe. One of the next 2 weeks. He was close to Jeremy Pruitt. Quay Walker close to Jeremy Pruitt. Pruitt leaving may impact those guys maybe more so than Ansley in the case of Tyson Campbell. Alan Verbanchik says Roquan's coming back to take care of unfinished business. Listen, there is nobody who'd love to see number 3 in a Georgia uniform for another year more than me. I just don't see that happening with Roquan Smith. I just don't see that. Joshua Jackson says about Jake Fromm. I agree with Fromm's bad throws because he did make 9 in the red zones or first downs. But I also watched Chaney should definitely ran Holyfield, Harrion if Michelle was hurt. So I don't know that Michelle was hurt. I just think in the moment, Georgia chose to go a different direction. And I realize in retrospect, it looks like, but Georgia should have just definitely ran Sonny Michel more. Sometimes I think that kind of stuff is just more apparent after the fact. And, the one thing that Kirby Smart has said a lot this year is, Georgia's going to keep chopping. It looks like that's what Georgia was trying to do with Nick Chubb. Chubb, looking back on the game on Monday, seemed to be ineffective. A lot of running calls for him did not yield big yards. But we were all supportive of Georgia and Kirby Smart early in the year when running games were ineffective in the first half. They stuck with the second half, and all of a sudden they started, wearing the opponent down and churning out those big yards. You can't abandon your best running backs, and you can't abandon your running game philosophy just because it doesn't work a few times. I mean, you just can't do that. Ultimately, I believe that all criticism of offensive coordinators, it's not about you gave the ball to this guy instead of that guy, or you ran it when you should have passed, or you passed it when you should have run it, or your ratio was too imbalanced. It's about ineffective plays. Chaney called some plays. They didn't work. But I don't know that it was as obvious they weren't going to work beforehand as we sort of think it is now after the fact. That feels like Monday morning quarterbacking to me. And listen, I do that kind of stuff for a living, but let's at least be self-aware enough to call it what it is. We are sort of Monday morning, or in this case, I guess it's Thursday morning quarterbacking from a Monday night game. But let's at least be self-aware enough to call it what it is. Levante Page says Alabama was literally looking for a Malcolm Parrish every single play. They may very well have been. And some of y'all have said that I have not singled out, his performance enough. That's a tough spot, y'all. I mean, everybody knows what happened. Do we really have to just rake this guy over the coals for a game that we all know was not, not good? And I'm not trying to pass out participation trophies. I'm really not. I mean, I try to be as honest and candid as we possibly can, but there's also a degree to which, I'm not looking for blood here either for a guy that already knows, and when we're already aware that 14 just didn't get it done for Georgia on Monday. We all know that. And, overall, I think it is an issue where the Georgia secondary as a whole needs to be upgraded because, I've heard a lot of people who've played football tell me that sometimes what looks obvious in a secondary is not as obvious as it looks. It seems like, okay, well, Parrish thought he was going to have safety help. The safety didn't come over. In this case, I guess it was Dominic Sanders, and that's that. It was just a blown assignment, blown coverage. What I'm told by people who've played the game is sometimes what seems obvious may not be quite as obvious as it looks. The truth is, I don't really know, but overall, I think Georgia's entire secondary needs to be upgraded. I mean, I think that you've got to find elite players to go in all those positions because the Georgia secondary probably overachieved a lot this season, but plucky underdogs is not the way to win a national championship. You got to have Tyson Campbell's out there. You got to have Richard LeCounte. You got to have D'Angelo Gibbs, and I hope that young man is ready to go in 2018. That's what national championship safeties and secondaries look like. So, you want to point the finger of blame at Sanders. You want to point the finger at blame for Parrish, who had a bad game. That's all fine and good. The only solution here is to upgrade the talent at those positions, and that's one of the spots where Georgia needs to do that. Do that a whole lot more. Rich Olenek says the 2017 class of defensive backs is going to be the upgrade. There's certainly a lot of them. I was rattling off names yesterday, and I was leaving some names out. One of the names that I left out was Trey Bishop, and I haven't heard much from Bishop this year overall. But that is one of those guys. And by the way, let's add Mark Webb in that discussion too, I guess. Actually, let's definitely add Mark Webb in that discussion because Webb may be one of the few freshmen we have heard a lot about over there, kind of moving from wide receiver to defensive back. So from that group, there are going to be some guys that do step up and do something. There's no doubt about that. But one of the things that's going to be interesting about the spring is sort of separating from the wheats from the tares, if you'll pardon that phrase, to find out of that group, because it's like, 7 defensive backs, something like that. They're not all going to be good. So let's find out which ones are. Robbie Holloway says, Darian Ford also on that final play. Interesting comment from Darian Ford there. Robbie Holloway says it was poor play calling. We got up on Bama in the first half and then played conservative in the second half, even as they kept scoring and narrowing our lead. We have to keep your foot on Bama's throat till the game ends for a chance at winning. So, Robbie, I can't tell you that you're wrong. You may very well be right. But I like to watch social media during the games. One of the good things about being in the press box when you have Wi-Fi that works is you can kind of sit there and, generally speaking, I'd rather be with the fans. But the cool thing about the press box is you do have the TV, you do have the actual, naked eye to just sort of look down there on the field. If the Wi-Fi works, you can have your computer up and you just kind of like sort of soak it all in at once. And I do like to see what y'all are saying during the games. And go back to the Oklahoma game. It's not conservative enough in the first half, too conservative in the second half. The same thing in the Alabama thing as well. I think there's nothing more frustrating as a sports fan than a football play that doesn't work. I just think that, and y'all know I come from the perspective of a fan here. There's nothing worse than watching your team run a play that doesn't work, because after the fact, it sort of looks like it was never going to work? How would you ever think that play's going to work? Because it just got blown up right there in all of our faces. I think that, and Seth did a good job of this. He laid out all of the plays, there in those sort of crucial fourth quarter moments. Go back and look at each one of those plays. Are they indefensible in the moment? I don't know that they are. What I'd be kind of curious to see is maybe we can get an X's and O's person to do this for us at some point in time. Did Alabama do something defensively different? Oliver Conley, who's kind of our, X's and O's type guy here for our family of websites, he said in the Rose Bowl in the second half, Georgia did dial up something different. Dialed up more like rain blitzes where they were, basically reading the center and sending backside pressure, and that confused Baker Mayfield, apparently. Did Alabama do something like that? Not that same call, but something like that to befuddle Georgia, or did they just bow their back and play harder? I'd be a little curious to find that out. Ryan Wilbanks asked if Nate McBride's going to be able to mimic as much as he could in the place of Roquan Smith. I think that Nate McBride's got a bright future at Georgia, but I don't believe that McBride's the next Roquan. I think the next Roquan, if he exists, may be Channing Tindall, and that probably won't be in 2018. But I think that Tindall has the makeup of a Roquan more than any other linebacker on that roster currently. And I think that if you want to sort of extrapolate to the 2019 class, I think the real Roquan may be Owen Popo, who is going to be listed as an outside linebacker, who Georgia almost certainly would play as an inside linebacker. And when you start thinking about, year 2021, year 2022, at that point in time, that may be your Roquan Smith, which is a long time to wait. I get that. But these Roquans aren't grown on trees. So next year, does Georgia have a dynamic playmaking linebacker in the interior? They may be okay at that position. I think Monty Rice is really good. I think he's also a different kind of player. I think the makeup of the Georgia defense will be a bit different next season because I don't think you can count on, Roquan Smith to save your bacon every time something goes wrong. Darian Ford says, get that Australian guy again, B.A. I think he's referring to Oliver Conley, who's from England. But we'll get Ollie on the show. That's actually probably a good idea. Darian, that was funny. Jennifer Stevens Fleming asked about Natrez Patrick. Patrick, at least the best that I know, his issue right now is not about his suspension from Georgia. It's his ongoing recovery. That was a condition of his drug test failure with the Athens-Clarke County stemming from that parole violation. I mean, right now he's in a recovery situation. He was at the game on Monday, but not in uniform. So Natrez Patrick's situation right now is more about, getting the help and treatment he needs more so than any kind of violation of UJ policy, because my understanding is that he is not in violation of a UJ policy here based on Greg McGarity himself, but it sounds like he's dealing with some life issues. Junior Baker, not happy with me, says I'm crazy about Nate McBride. That McBride has the capabilities to be better than Roquan. McBride is bigger, stronger, and faster. You got to watch the film, my man. All right, so that's Junior Baker, and Junior does watch a lot of this film. Junior's all over that recruiting stuff. Y'all see him on Twitter a bunch. So he says McBride can be the next Roquan. So we'll see. We'll see if that plays out that way. All right, Nakia Hester. Let me read Nakia's quote here. We got to get ready to get out of here too in a minute. We haven't heard from Nakia in a while, it doesn't seem like. Nakia says, I hate to keep pushing this issue, but the biggest problem I noticed this past season was how it seemed that Kirby felt obligated to give Chubb his carries no matter if he was effective or not. Next season, we shouldn't have that obligation to a player, just food for thought. I think that's interesting. I think that some Georgia fans this season, listen, we try to keep it as candid as we can here, keep it as real as we can here during this portion of our broadcast. I think there are some Georgia fans that would agree with Nakia that at moments this year, take DeAndre Swift, for instance. It looked like Swift was a more dynamic player than Nick Chubb. Maybe Swift deserved some carries that maybe were going to Chubb. But then you see Chubb do some of the things that he does against Oklahoma, and you realize, oh, that's why he's in the game. CBS Sports had this great picture of Chubb essentially being wrestled to the ground by two Oklahoma defenders. I mean, he's like this far off the turf. And that turns into like a 45-yard touchdown or something crazy like that. So ultimately, Chubb's presence on the field, I believe, is more than validated. And conversely, I love DeAndre Swift as much as anybody does. But Swift ran smack dab into the back of Andrew Thomas 2 games in a row. against Oklahoma, and he did the same thing on a slightly different play against Alabama. So, Georgia had kind of a tailback got by committee this year that worked out pretty well. Chubb and Michelle both set records. DeAndre Swift looks like he could be a future star. I don't know that any one of those guys, though, was ready to shoulder the load on his own. I think when it's all said and done, and this is maybe an unsatisfying thing to hear, I think that Jim Chaney actually did a pretty good job managing those carries, all things being considered. Zane Gregory Taylor says, who will Georgia's best rookie be? From the incoming freshman for the 2018 class? It's a pretty good question. That's a pretty good question. Let's see how it finishes off before we answer that. But clearly, I mean, my gosh, Alabama at one point in time had 6 true freshmen on offense of the night. So, this notion that freshmen can't contribute to championships, we've ended that discussion forever because and Mike Johnson, to his credit, he pointed this out on SEC Country Live yesterday. He said the same thing on Twitter. We're going to fall over ourselves about Tua and obviously Najee Harris. I just think it's a terrific running back. But Mike's right. They put Alex Leatherwood at left tackle, the freshman offensive lineman, and the Alabama offense changed after that. Rookies, as you call them, incoming freshmen. Yeah, Georgia's going to need to lean on a few of those next year, probably for sure. Dennis Crosby also likes the Oliver Conley film room stuff. So, yeah, we'll get Ollie on the show again. I like having Ollie here, too, as well. The problem with getting Ollie on the show is he lives in England, so I have to figure out how to do, international dialing to get him on the phone. But we'll get him. That's a good idea. All right, let me get ready to get out of here. Jennifer Stevenson Fleming also agrees about Nate McBride. Thank you, Junior, for the kind words. Appreciate that. All right, I'm trying to get ready to get out of here. I'm just going to scroll through here kind of quick. All right. There's a lot of comments. I'm sorry, y'all. We got to go. Jeremy Wiley kind of agreeing with what I said on DeAndre Swift. Listen, I still think DeAndre Swift can have a big-time year next season, though. When you see that stable of running backs for Alabama, it does make you think, boy, you do need for Zamir White to get healthy here. I mean, it's going to take him a minute probably. I really like Elijah Holyfield, but if you're going to be championship level, you probably got to get Zamir back in the fold here a little bit too in 2018 also. And based on the way that he's attacking this recovery, there's every reason to believe that will happen. Thank you all for being with us on the program today. Really appreciate it. I'm back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live. Appreciate you being a part of your comments. If I missed them, you can hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. We'll keep talking about this stuff and figuring out how Georgia gets that over that hump, wins that national championship. I'll look forward to doing that with you tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. once again. See you at 3 p.m. today, Eastern Time anyway, for SEC Country Live. Y'all have a good day.